They thought it was routine. Just another courtroom. Another early morning. Another black woman who'd stay quiet and keep her head down while power flexed its privilege. But what they didn't know was that this woman didn't just walk into the courtroom. She was the courtroom. When two officers struck a seemingly unassuming woman in front of a half-empty gallery, they thought they were asserting control, sending a message, reminding everyone who was still in charge. What they didn't realize, they had just laid hands on a sitting judge, and in the next 4 minutes, their careers, reputations, and everything they'd hidden behind for decades would begin to unravel, thread by thread, lie by lie, until the entire empire they'd built on silence and immunity began to crumble beneath them. This isn't just a story about a slap. It's not even about misconduct. It's about a reckoning. Because when justice is personified by a woman like Clara May, graceful as a sunrise, unshakable as bedrock, the scales stop tipping for the powerful, and they start balancing for the silenced. So take a deep breath. What you're about to see isn't courtroom drama. It's an autopsy of power. It's what happens when truth refuses to stay buried, and a woman who spent her whole life playing by the rules finally decides to rewrite them. And the first line, it started with a slap. Charleston, South Carolina, a city where the cobblestone whispers and the courthouse columns carry secrets. Grace on the outside, ghosts in the walls. That morning, the sun had barely broken the horizon when Judge Clara May stepped through the courthouse doors. 62 years old, spine like steel, eyes that didn't just see you, they weighed you. She moved like legacy incarnate. No entourage, no spectacle, just quiet certainty that came from 3 decades of fighting the justice system from every angle. Defender, prosecutor, judge. The first black woman to ever sit on Charleston's highest bench. And still, after all these years, some people pretended not to see her. Pretended she didn't belong. That was their first mistake. Because Claire didn't need your permission to exist in power. She was the power they thought they controlled. The robe didn't give her authority. It only made it visible. Now, here's what you need to understand. Courtrooms are supposed to be places of order, procedure, control. But sometimes, on rare, unforgettable days, they become something else entirely. A reckoning. That's what this is. Because what happened next didn't just reveal one officer's arrogance. It cracked open a system that had spent years covering for him. Every report vanished, every complaint erased, every camera malfunction that made sure the story never got out. Until now. Until her. So before we dive in, take a second. Let us know where you're watching from and what time you found this. We read every single comment because moments like this, they echo differently in different places. But no matter where you are, one thing's certain. Once you see what happened in that courtroom, you won't be able to look away. Because sometimes justice doesn't whisper. It roars. She wasn't robed yet. Not behind the bench. Just standing there, like any other woman in the room. To them, she was invisible. A shadow. Background noise. But shadows, as they were about to learn, can swallow the whole damn room when the light hits them wrong. What Sergeant Travis Boone didn't realize, what the badge and the legacy and the unchecked power had shielded him from seeing, was that he'd just struck the one person in that building with the authority to dismantle everything he believed made him untouchable. And it would take exactly 4 minutes for the ground to start cracking. So buckle up, because what happened next didn't just shake one courtroom. It echoed across the city, and it hasn't stopped since. Charleston had always worn its contradictions like perfume. Elegant, perfumed, and laced with something rotten underneath. The city shimmered in the morning like a painting from a different time. Gas lamps still flickering. Spanish moss curled around wrought iron balconies. The sound of church bells echoing over cobblestones worn smooth by centuries. But beneath the charm, beneath the picture postcard grace, lay something older, heavier, a silence that pulsed just under the rhythm of city life. Charleston didn't talk about its ghosts. It preserved them, polished them, built monuments over their bones, and called it heritage. But Judge Clara May didn't believe in preserving ghosts. She believed in exorcising them. And on this particular morning, she walked into the courthouse, not knowing that by sundown, she'd be swinging open the doors others had spent decades nailing shut. The building itself stood like a fortress carved from justice and contradiction. Cold marble, neoclassical columns that stretched toward the heavens but offered no warmth. A monument to law that, for generations, had served power more often than truth. Clara had walked its halls for 33 years. She knew every inch of it, every echo on every floor, every draft that slipped beneath heavy wooden doors, every crack in the foundation that reminded her this building was old enough to remember a time when people like her weren't even allowed to enter, let alone rule from the bench. She didn't need fanfare, no press, no honor guard, just the click of her heels on stone and the nods of security guards who had learned, over time, not to mistake her silence for passivity. At 62, Clara May carried herself like a tide, slow, constant, impossible to stop. Her hair, silver-streaked, and pulled into a bun so tight it looked like it had been tied with precision tools. Her eyes, sharp brown and merciless. They didn't just look at you. They sorted you, calculated your weight in truth, in fear, in intent. She had never needed to raise her voice to command a room, because when she did speak, people listened. But behind the authority was a history people conveniently forgot. They forgot she was the daughter of a seamstress who used to iron white lawyers' shirts until her knuckles bled. They forgot she'd spent her early years fighting uphill battles as a defense attorney for clients who couldn't afford bail, much less justice. They forgot she'd later become a prosecutor, not because she trusted the system, but because she wanted to crack it open from the inside. They forgot all of it. Or maybe they just chose not to remember, because to some in Charleston, a black woman in robes wasn't just unfamiliar. It was offensive, an affront to a hierarchy they never wanted disturbed. And Clara had never been interested in making them comfortable. The room was empty when she entered, not yet filled with press, not yet swarmed with whispers, just her and the bench. She stood in front of it for a long moment, staring at the chair she had ruled from. The gavel rested exactly where she had left it. The robe, folded neatly on the arm of the chair, looked almost weightless now, but she remembered how heavy it used to feel. Not from fabric, from expectation. Carter stepped in behind her, coat still damp from the rain. "They want to name the judicial conference room after you," he said. Clara raised an eyebrow. "I haven't died." He smirked. "Not yet." She smiled faintly, then turned back to the bench. "Are the reforms going to stick?" Carter shrugged. "Some will. Others will take time." Clara nodded. "That's what they never tell you about justice," she said. "It's not a moment. It's erosion and rebuilding." That afternoon, she stood before the State Judiciary Review Board. Press flanked the walls. Microphones clicked on. Flashbulbs popped like popcorn. But Clara didn't flinch. She cleared her throat and began. "I am submitting my resignation as a sitting judge of the Charleston Circuit Court." Gasps rippled through the room, but Clara didn't pause. "I believe in the law. I believe in its power to protect, to punish, and to heal. But I also believe that institutions must be rebuilt by new hands." I lit a fire. It is not for me to stand in its glow. A board member stood, visibly moved. "Judge May," he said, "your actions have inspired a movement. You could remain. You could lead this change." Clara looked at him, eyes soft but firm. Change doesn't need a monument. It needs momentum. And with that, she turned to leave, but paused at the door. One last thing. She looked out over the room, at the young clerks, at the women in the back row, at the next generation already watching. Make sure the next woman who wears this robe doesn't have to fight like I did, just to be heard. Then she walked out, head high, voice steady, back unbent. 2 months later, Clara sat on the front porch of her sister's house in Mount Pleasant. It was quiet now, the kind of quiet that felt earned. Her nephew came around the corner, bike wheels humming on wet pavement. He dropped it on the lawn, ran up the steps, and threw his arms around her. "Auntie Clara." She caught him in a hug. Strong, silent. "I saw you on TV," he said into her shoulder. I saw you make them listen. She pulled back and looked him in the eye. I made them look. Listening. That's still up to them. He nodded with the kind of solemn, understanding kids aren't supposed to have, but often do. They sat on the porch together as the sun broke through the clouds. The city still buzzed beyond the trees. But here, it was still, peaceful. Not because the war was over, but because the truth had finally been spoken out loud. This isn't just a courtroom drama. It's not just about one corrupt cop or one brave judge. It's a mirror, a question, a warning, a promise. Because Clara May isn't the hero we fantasize about. She's the one we need. Not someone who wins with fury, but someone who stands in silence so others can speak. Someone who uses her voice, her position, and her pain, not to rule, but to ripple. Because systems don't break by accident. They're broken open. And justice, real justice, it's not a gavel strike. It's what happens after the echo fades, and someone decides to stay in the room. 3 weeks after her resignation, the Judicial Review Board released its findings. 9 active investigations, for formal suspensions. 17 cases reopened. 1 public apology from the mayor's office. The system hadn't healed, but it had been cracked open. And in the light that poured through those cracks, something new began to grow. Not fast, not perfect, but alive. They tried to erase her, tried to smear her name, rewrite her story, twist her image, until the headlines forgot what really happened. But Clara May didn't disappear. She multiplied. In classrooms, in courtrooms, in the quiet defiance of young law students highlighting her cases instead of the ones the system had always taught. They didn't just remember her name. They remembered her silence, her stare, her stillness, and the power of a woman who didn't yell to be heard. She simply refused to be ignored. The building that once held her courtroom now bears a plaque near the west entrance. It doesn't call her a hero. It doesn't dramatize the slap. It says one thing. This chamber once held a woman who chose justice over safety, truth over silence, and the future over herself. The boy from the vandalism case. He's in college now. Criminal justice major. His first paper? The day my judge didn't flinch. He doesn't talk much about what happened, but people say he walks a little taller now, that his voice is steadier, that when he enters a room, he knows he belongs, because someone once fought a war, so he wouldn't have to. In Washington, policy shifts begin to echo from what happened in Charleston. Federal funds restructured. Whistleblower protections strengthened. A task force, named after Judge May, formed to audit police misconduct cases across 5 states. And buried in the back of the press release is a single quote. The truth isn't always loud, but when it refuses to leave the room, change becomes inevitable. Clara never went back to the bench. She didn't write a memoir, didn't give speeches, didn't chase the spotlight. She didn't need to, because she'd already lit the match. And when the kindling is dry enough, a single flame is all it takes. Sometimes she still walks the courthouse steps, early in the morning, before the cameras, before the noise. Not to remember, to remind the walls what it looks like when one woman says, no more. To remind herself that even if the seat is empty, the message still echoes. Because this story, it was never about a slap. It was about what that slap uncovered. A system of rot, a culture of silence, a legacy of power that chose protection over accountability, until it met someone it couldn't silence. So if you remember anything, let it be this. Justice doesn't always arrive in thunder. Sometimes it shows up as a woman in plain clothes, walking into a courtroom and refusing to lower her eyes. Clara May didn't just survive the system. She rewrote the terms. And every fire that burns for change today, it owes something to the spark she left behind. There comes a time in life when silence is no longer strength, but surrender. The story of Judge Clara May reminds us that doing the right thing doesn't get easier with age. It gets heavier, especially when you've seen how deeply systems can fail, how often truth is buried beneath politics, and how quickly people forget what integrity looks like. But Clara teaches us something powerful, that it's never too late to take a stand. That wisdom isn't just about what you know. It's about what you choose to protect. And that sometimes, the quiet courage of one person can shake the foundations others were too afraid to touch. For many of us, especially those who have lived through decades of change and disappointment, it's easy to feel like the world doesn't listen anymore. But maybe, just maybe, the world is waiting for voices like yours to rise again. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What lesson stood out most to you? What truth are you still holding on to? Leave a comment and let us know. Hit like if you believe integrity still matters. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that speaks to your heart and reminds you it's never too late to stand tall. That morning, she arrived early. It was supposed to be a routine docket, vandalism charge, minor, juvenile defendant. Nothing remarkable, nothing new. But the moment she passed through the security checkpoint, something in her spine went stiff. That instinct, the one that had sharpened itself over decades of courtroom wars, whispered in her ear, something's wrong. The courthouse buzzed like it always did. Lawyers juggling coffee and case files. Clerks whispering deadlines. Fluorescent lights humming with fatigue. But under all of that, there was a hum she couldn't place. A frequency she hadn't heard in a while. Then came the clerk's voice, tight and nervous. "Morning, Judge May. Officer Boone's already inside." Clara stopped cold. "Boone?" "Yes, ma'am. Sergeant Travis Boone. He's the arresting officer on the Jameson vandalism case. He's been waiting." The name struck like the first crack of thunder before a storm. Travis Boone, mid-40s, clean-cut, a third-generation cop with a reputation so deeply etched into Charleston law enforcement that you didn't meet him. You inherited him. He was the kind of man who wore his badge like a birthright, not a duty. The kind who smiled only when he was winning or when someone else was losing. He walked through the world with a sense of impunity so thick you could bottle it. And Clara knew him, not personally, but intimately. His name had appeared in far too many internal reports that somehow ended up closed without consequence. Excessive force, harassment, unprofessional conduct, you name it, and every single one vanished, buried, washed away like footprints in a flood. Clara didn't need to look him up. She'd memorized his file the first time she saw it, because men like Boone weren't anomalies. They were symptoms. Symptoms of a system that protected itself by eating its own conscience. When Clara stepped into the courtroom that day, she didn't wear her robe. Not yet. She wanted to observe first, to feel the air before commanding it, to see how Boone acted when he didn't think he was being watched by someone with authority. And that's when she saw him. Prosecution table, arms crossed, jaw set, the smirk practically tattooed onto his face. The defendant, a boy barely 16, sat beside a public defender who looked like he hadn't slept in days. The kid's hand shook slightly, tucked beneath the table. A sweatshirt too big for his frame. Shoes scuffed. Shoulders curled inward like he was bracing for something. Clara's eyes didn't miss a thing. Not the boy's fear. Not Boone's swagger. Not the subtle tension clinging to the room like static. Then Boone spoke loud and patient. "Let's get this started. I don't have all day." Clara's voice cut through the air like glass. "I suggest you find the time." Boone turned, confused. He didn't recognize her. Didn't bother to see her. To him, she was background noise. A clerk. A court assistant. Maybe a bailiff. Someone to ignore. Someone to command. "Are you here for the defense?" he asked, voice smug. Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, standing there in plain clothes, unrobed, unnoticed, she'd already decided how this day would go. And Boone, he had no idea of the storm he had just walked into. The courtroom was half asleep. Early docket. Low turnout. Just a few early bird journalists setting up in the gallery. A handful of attorneys hunched over briefcases. 2 uniformed officers leaned against the back wall, sipping burnt coffee, waiting for the day to begin. And then there was Boone, already there, already pacing. He didn't sit. Men like him never sat unless it served a purpose. He stood at the prosecution table, arms crossed over his badge, his expression carved from stone and contempt. The public defender sat quietly beside a teenage boy who looked like he'd been dropped into a war zone with nothing but hope and a hoodie. Boone barely glanced at him. To Boone, the kid wasn't a person. He was paperwork, a case file and sneakers. He didn't notice Clara when she entered. She came in through the side, not in her robe, not behind the bench. Just a woman in a black coat and courtroom heels, scanning the room with the eyes of someone who'd seen 1,000 hearings and had learned to recognize danger by the temperature in the air. She walked past the clerk, past the benches, toward the side table where the docket folder sat. Boone didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge her, didn't recognize her. Instead, he barked toward the clerk. "Let's get this started, yeah? I've got better things to do." That's when Clara responded, her voice calm, flat. "I suggest you find the time." The sound made Boone pause. He turned, expression twisted slightly in confusion. She wasn't where he expected authority to come from. No robe, no bench, no gavels or titles. Just a woman, standing, existing. To him, that meant she was nothing. "You here for the defense," he said, smirking. Clara said nothing, just picked up the folder and began reviewing. The silence that followed was charged, not loud, but dense, like the static right before lightning breaks open the sky. Boone didn't like being ignored. He wasn't built for it. He stormed over. "Hey, I'm talking to you," I said. Then it happened. A sharp, open-handed slap cracked through the room like a gunshot. Time didn't stop. It collapsed. There was a sound, half gasp, half silence, that rose and then disappeared like the air had been sucked out of the building. A coffee cup teetered, paused, and settled without falling. A pen dropped from a lawyer's hand but never hit the floor. It was caught midair by instinct trained in shock. Even the humming fluorescent lights above seemed to flinch. Claire didn't move. She didn't lift her hand to her cheek, didn't recoil, didn't stumble. She just stood there, eyes fixed on the man who'd struck her, cheek already flushing red from impact. Boone took a step back. Not from fear. Not yet. More from surprise, like a child who broke something expensive and wasn't sure if anyone saw. And then, under his breath, he said the thing that sealed his fate. Not even close. "You people need to learn some respect." Someone in the back whispered, Oh my God." Another voice, trembling, "Is she okay?" But Clara wasn't broken. She was calculating. And Boone had no idea he'd just walked into a trap, one he'd set for himself with every arrogant step he'd ever taken inside that building. He puffed up again, desperate to reclaim control. "I don't care who you think you are," he barked. "You don't get to strut around like." Clara stepped forward. Once, then again. The sound of her heels was louder now, like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. She's not in her robe," the clerk whispered. But Boone wasn't listening. He didn't see the courtroom shifting around him, didn't see the eyes widening, the phones lifting, didn't notice how even the air seemed to pull back from him, like it didn't want to be associated. And then, with a voice that held steel in every syllable, Clara spoke. "Is this how you treat officers of the court, Sergeant?" The color drained from one officer's face. A pen hit the floor and rolled, forgotten. Boone blinked. Once. Twice. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. Clara stepped onto the platform. Up. Then up again. And when she turned to face him, from the bench, the room stopped breathing altogether. The robe wasn't there. But the authority? It had just taken its seat. "Sergeant Boone," she said, clasping her hands in front of her, her voice calm but sharpened to a blade. "Did you just strike me in this courtroom?" He opened his mouth, closed it, licked his lips like a man searching for a lie that might save him. I didn't know who you were." "That's not what I asked," Clara replied, slicing clean through his defense. "Did you just put your hand on me? Yes or no?" In the back, someone was already recording. Not just a moment anymore. Evidence. "I thought you were." He tried again. "You thought I was beneath you," she said. The words landed like fists. "You assaulted a woman in a courtroom. Your only defense is ignorance and arrogance." He took a step forward, trying to claw his way back into control. But it was already too late, and Clara wasn't done. "If I were a white male judge," she said, her voice now low and venomous, "sitting here with the same title, would you have slapped me?" Boone said nothing, but his silence, it screamed. The gavel hadn't dropped yet, but the judgment, it had already begun. The room was still frozen, not in confusion anymore, in realization, the kind that doesn't happen all at once, but creeps in like cold water seeping through floorboards. She wasn't just a woman. She wasn't just a victim. She was the judge, and now she was seated, high-centered, commanding, not because she needed the height, but because the truth had finally risen to meet her. Boone stood rooted in place. For the first time in his career, his badge didn't feel like armor. It felt like evidence. Claire didn't speak right away. She let the silence expand on purpose, letting the weight of what had just happened settle into the bones of every person in that room. Even Officer Mills, the bailiff, stood stiff at the wall, jaw clenched, eyes flickering toward Boone with something just shy of disbelief. Clara folded her hands, her voice calm, but sharp enough to slice concrete. "Sergeant Boone," she said. He flinched. "Did you just strike me in this courtroom?" His mouth opened, closed. He looked around, desperate for support, for a familiar face, for anyone to throw him a lifeline. But the sea around him had gone dead still. He muttered, I didn't know who you were." "That is not what I asked," Clara said again, each word trimmed of excess, each syllable precise. "Yes or no?" His shoulders sagged just a little. "Yes," he mumbled, "but I didn't." Clara cut him off, clean and cold. "You came at me. I didn't recognize you. You weren't in your robe." Her voice never rose, but her words struck like the report of a sniper rifle. "You thought I was beneath you." Boone's jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed. "You're twisting this into something it's not." "I'm not twisting anything," she replied. "I'm describing exactly what happened. You assaulted a woman, unprovoked, in a courtroom. Your only defense is that you didn't think she mattered." Another breathless pause. "You didn't know I was a judge, but you knew I was a black woman. That, apparently, was enough for your hand to rise." Boone stepped back again, forgetting where he was, forgetting who he was. He turned toward the gallery, but no one met his eyes. The other officers at the back? Still, silent, studying the corners of the ceiling, because they'd just remembered something he'd forgotten. This courtroom was under video surveillance. Clara shifted slightly, her voice now like ice running beneath a steel bridge. "Officer Mills," she said. The bailiff snapped to attention. "Yes, Your Honor." "Is this courtroom currently being recorded?" "Yes, ma'am. 2 feeds, audio and video." "Then let the record reflect that the incident in question is not only witnessed by those present, but captured on official surveillance footage." And just like that, Boone's entire reality began to shrink. He looked up, finally noticing the 2 red camera lights blinking from the corners of the ceiling. Watching, listening, his face drained of color. He turned to Clara, voice climbing, not out of courage, but panic. "I didn't mean." She raised a hand. It was subtle, elegant, and more commanding than a yell. "You've had 20 years of not meaning it," she said. "I've read your file. I've seen the complaints. I've seen how they disappear." Her voice dropped now, not in weakness, but in focus. "But what's different today is this." She leaned forward. "This happened in front of witnesses, under cameras, to a judge." He tried again, grasping. "I've served this city for 2 decades. I've risked my life. You're going to throw me to the wolves over one mistake in a tense moment." Claire's reply was immediate. "I'm not throwing you to the wolves, Sergeant," she said, rising from her chair like a verdict made flesh. "I'm handing you to the law." And there it was. Sharp. Final. You could feel the room straighten around her. Even the walls seemed to pull tighter. She turned to the clerk. "Miss Harper, please enter into the record. Officer Travis Boone has admitted to striking a sitting judge inside a courtroom without cause or provocation." Boone backed up a step, and then another, like the floor itself was turning against him. He looked toward the boy, the teenage defendant still sitting at the table. The boy met his gaze. Not in fear. Not anymore. In something colder. Something Boone had never expected. Pity. The same look Boone had given to handcuffed men as he threw them into the back of a squad car. Now it was aimed at him. "Officer Mills," Clara called. The bailiff stepped forward, steady and alert. "Yes, Your Honor." "Please escort Sergeant Boone to holding room B. He is not to leave this building until Internal Affairs arrives." "Understood. No cuffs for now," she added. "He is still a sworn officer. I expect professionalism." Mills nodded, then stepped to Boone's side, his hand resting on his belt, not threatening, but ready. Boone turned toward Clara one last time, voice cracking with something like disbelief. "You think you've won, don't you?" She didn't blink, didn't shift, just whispered, "I think, for once, the right person is losing." The door shut behind them with a low, final click, and in that sound, you could almost hear a foundation begin to crack. The courtroom emptied like air leaving a balloon, slow at first, then all at once. Reporters whispered into their recorders. Attorneys made quiet, urgent phone calls in the hallway. Security guards who'd spent years on autopilot now stood alert, stiff, wide-eyed. Everyone had seen what happened, but only Clara knew what it meant. This wasn't just about Boone anymore. This was about what Boone represented. The arrogance, the impunity, the whispers that never made it into reports, the patterns that everyone saw but no one dared connect. Until now. Until her. She stepped into her chambers, without a word. The door clicked shut behind her, like a vault sealing truth inside. She didn't sit right away. She walked to the mirror instead, her robe removed, folded neatly over one arm. In the glass, she saw the faint mark on her cheek. It was already fading, but she didn't want to forget it. Not because it hurt, because it mattered. Because too many people had left this courthouse with worse marks, on their skin, on their dignity, on their lives, and never got a single moment of reckoning. This time would be different. This time, the system was going to feel it. A knock. Carter Lang stepped in, broad-shouldered, tight-lipped, loyal to a fault. Her bailiff, her shadow, her wall. "They've got him in holding room B," he said. "Internal Affairs is sending 2 agents. ETA 20 minutes. Clara nodded once. He lingered. "Judge," he hesitated. "Word is, Boone's union already made a call. They're trying to contain it." Clara didn't flinch. "Of course they are." She walked behind her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a yellow legal pad, the same kind she'd used for 30 years. Its corners were square, its pages crisp, but the handwriting she began to lay down was anything but calm. Incident, courtroom assault. Status, on record. Witnesses, present. Cameras, active. Officer's record, 5 complaints in 7 years. She didn't stop writing. Start pulling every case where Boone was lead arresting officer or gave sworn testimony. She said without looking up, "I want them flagged." Carter blinked. "That's going to be a lot." "Then we'd better start now." By the time Internal Affairs arrived, her desk was a war map. Folders, printouts, sticky notes, case numbers that hadn't been touched in years. One of the agents, a sharp-eyed Latina named Agent Reyes, placed a flash drive on the desk. "The courtroom footage is already backed up to our servers," she said. "We've reviewed it. The strike, the statement, your response. It's all there." The other agent, Rosalind Keene, a seasoned IA investigator known in hushed tones as the department's cleaner, spoke next. "Judge, we've been watching Boone for a while," she said, "but his record's just clean enough to skate. Every time we got close, something disappeared." "Convenient," Clara muttered. "That word should be a felony." Reyes added. "They weren't here to shake hands. They were here because they saw what Clara saw. Rot, not in one man. In floorboards, the blueprints, the beams." Keene placed a manila folder on the table. "We think you'll want to see this." Clara opened it. Inside, an internal complaint from 2019. A 17-year-old boy, beaten during arrest. Body cam footage inconclusive. Original video mysteriously gone. Case dismissed for insufficient evidence. She flipped to the last page. Reviewed and closed by Detective M. Whitaker. She froze. As in, Captain Whitaker? Boone's former training officer, she asked. Reyes nodded. Retired last year, but most of his command staff's still in place. Keene tapped the folder again, and this wasn't the only one. We found 3 more cases with identical language. Closed fast. Quietly. Another folder slid across the desk. This one bore a different name. ADA Carson E. Ramsey. Clara's eyes narrowed. Ramsey had stood in her courtroom dozens of times, had struck plea deals like clockwork, had dismissed shaky evidence like it was a formality, had once patted Boone on the back in full view after a questionable testimony. It had felt wrong then. Now, it felt orchestrated. What do you want to do, Judge? Keene asked. Clara looked up, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. I want a list, she said. Every case Boone touched. Every complaint that was buried. Every prosecutor who made it disappear. She paused. And I want them on my desk by sunrise. Reyes gave a low whistle. That'll take all night. Clara didn't blink. Then don't stop working. By 6 a.m., the courthouse was awake, but only barely. Janitors mopped floors under flickering lights. The front entrance hadn't opened yet, but inside Clara's chambers, no one had slept. Not her. Not the agents. Not Carter. Files covered every inch of space, like the truth had finally exploded after years of being sealed in manila folders and court records no one ever read twice. Carter placed a fresh coffee beside her, wordless. How bad is it? He asked, though he already knew. Clara kept writing as she spoke. 19 complaints linked to Boone. 12 against officers under his command. For prosecutors, declined charges. 2 body cam videos lost during IA reviews. 3 cases dismissed with no follow-up. Carter exhaled slowly. That's not a bad apple. No, Clara said, looking up. That's a rotting orchard. Before he could respond, the office phone rang. She picked it up. Judge May. A pause. A low, familiar voice. Clara, it said. It's Chief Nolan. She leaned back. I was expecting your call. I'm not calling to defend Boone, he said. No, she replied. You're calling to control the explosion. He didn't deny it. Clara, he said carefully, you're pulling on a thread that could tear this department apart. She didn't hesitate. That's exactly the idea. By 9 a.m., the courthouse didn't feel like a courthouse anymore. It felt like a powder keg. Reporters lined the front steps like vultures, circling something that hadn't died yet. Clerks whispered in corners. Defense attorneys walked a little faster, spoke a little softer, and every cop in the building had suddenly remembered how loud their boots sounded in a quiet hallway. Inside, Judge Clara May wasn't wearing her robe. She wasn't presiding today. Today, she was preparing for war. The moment she stepped into the courtroom, the energy shifted. She didn't have to say a word. The weight of what had already happened walked ahead of her, whispering into every ear. She didn't back down. She didn't flinch. She's still here. Agent Rosalind Keene followed close behind, her eyes scanning the gallery like a sniper on overwatch. Carter Lang walked to Clara's left, bailiff, bodyguard, loyalist. At the far end of the room, waiting for her, was Assistant District Attorney Carson Ramsey. Beside him, a young, pale man in a perfectly tailored suit, too stiff to breathe properly. His name tag read Elliot Parrish. State Ethics Board. But everything about him screamed hatchet man. Ramsey stood like someone who had trained for this moment, but hadn't prepared for Clara. Judge May, Parrish greeted, offering a practiced smile that didn't quite touch his eyes. We've received your request for a public hearing regarding your recusal. I'm here to clarify it, and to make it part of the record. Clara nodded and took her seat, not behind the bench, but across from them, eye level. Equal, unyielding. I've reviewed the motion filed by the DA's office. Clara began, voice firm, words clipped. It claims I'm emotionally compromised and potentially biased due to the incident involving Officer Boone. Ramsey adjusted his tie. Our concern is strictly procedural. Clara cut him off. I am fully aware of the statute, she said, which is why I'm choosing to step down. Not because I'm compromised, but because I refuse to let this case vanish in a quiet corner while the city looks away. A flicker of discomfort passed across Parrish's face. The press leaned in, and Clara turned to them, locking eyes with a young black journalist in the front row. I am requesting that the Boone case be elevated to special review status, she said clearly, and that a federal monitor be assigned to investigate not only this incident, but every case linked to Officer Boone, including prosecutorial collusion and suppression of evidence. A ripple moved through the gallery, half shock, half vindication. Ramsey tried to interject. Judge, with all due respect, you are suggesting a conspiracy. I'm not suggesting anything, Clara replied coldly. I'm proving it. She turned and nodded to Agent Keene, who stepped forward with a thick folder and placed it on the table between them. Inside, 3 formal complaints, 5 sealed memos, 2 missing body cam logs, a court transcript from a 2018 juvenile trial where Boone's testimony contradicted the physical evidence, signed off by none other than Carson Ramsey. You declined to prosecute Boone in 5 separate cases, Clara said, despite documented use of excessive force and inconsistent statements under oath. She leaned in slightly, and in every single one, the defense was pressured into accepting plea deals, many of them young black defendants without proper counsel. Ramsey went pale. Parrish went quiet. Keene didn't stop. She slid another document across the table, this one thinner, but heavier. A wire transfer. $15,000 from an entity tied to the Charleston Police Benevolent Fund, Keene said, earmarked for scholarship program. But half was rerouted into a legal defense fund used last year for Officer Boone. Parrish blinked. That's not relevant to. It is, Clara said, if it shows that public funds are being funneled into legal shields for corrupt officers. That's not coincidence. It's a pattern. And then she dropped the final card. She turned back to Ramsey. Tell me, she said softly. Who protected Boone when the body cam footage disappeared in 2019? The one where a minor ended up in hospital. Ramsey opened his mouth, then closed it. Agent Keene answered instead. We believe it wasn't lost. It was rerouted. Clara's eyes sharpened. To where? Keene slid a slip of paper across the table. To a private security firm based in Atlanta. One with a retainer contract from the Charleston mayor's office. Ramsey didn't speak, because he didn't need to. He was already drowning in the silence. And who approved that contract? Clara asked, voice like a needle. Keene delivered the final strike. You did. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Journalists stood. People shouted. The gallery had turned into a courtroom again. Not of law, but of public opinion. And Clara had just become its prosecutor, its witness, and its voice. Ramsey shoved back his chair, standing too fast, knocking the leg against the table. This is character assassination, he shouted. No, Clara said calmly. This is exposure, and it's long overdue. Parrish tried to salvage what he could. I need time to process this information. You'll have it, Clara replied, but let the record reflect that I am stepping down from the Boone arraignment, not because I'm compromised, but because I will not let this case be buried under procedural convenience. She turned toward the reporters now, her voice rising like a verdict. This city has protected a structure of unchecked power for too long. Today is not about a slap. It's about what that slap revealed. She paused, and then said what no one else dared to say out loud. A system built on fear, silence, and loyalty to everything but the truth. She looked straight at Ramsey, and that system is beginning to crumble. Outside, flashbulbs erupted as Ramsey left in a blur, sweating, shaking, already on the phone with someone higher up who wouldn't be able to save him. Clara stood with Carter and Agent Keene just inside the doors. Carter leaned in. You think they'll come after you? Clara didn't hesitate. They already have. Her phone buzzed. One message. No name. No number. Just 5 words. You need to stop. She turned the screen to Keen. Keen looked at it, then nodded slowly. Good, she said. That means we're hitting nerves. Clara looked through the courthouse windows, beyond the marble columns and historic facades, past the press, past the fear. She wasn't just trying to bring justice to one man anymore. She was about to dismantle the machine that made men like impossible. And someone out there, someone powerful, had just realized they couldn't stop her the usual way. So now, they were going to try the dangerous way. And that was their final mistake. By nightfall, the city was buzzing. Not just in the headlines, not just on the courthouse steps, but in backrooms, private group chats, boardrooms with locked doors and lawyers on speed dial. Judge Clara May had gone from a respected jurist to a live grenade, pulled pin ticking, and those who had once smiled in her courtroom were now whispering behind closed doors, trying to figure out how to put the pin back in before the explosion reached them. But Clara, she wasn't slowing down. She was sharpening. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Still no name. Nice house in Mount Pleasant. Does your nephew still bike home alone? The words didn't hit like a threat. They hit like strategy. Calculated. Clean. Dangerous. Not designed to intimidate. Designed to warn. She stood still for a moment, reading it twice. Not because she didn't understand, but because she did. Someone was reminding her how the game had always been played. Not with trials. Not with truth. But with fear. Clara walked to the office door, locked it quietly, then turned to Carter. He read the message once, and his expression changed instantly. That son of a... Don't, Clara interrupted. Her voice didn't rise. It narrowed. I need a name, she said. Whoever sent that. Carter nodded. I'll get it. And Carter. Yeah, I want my nephew pulled from school. Quietly. I want someone I trust watching my sister's house. No uniforms. No sirens. He didn't argue. He didn't even blink. He just picked up the phone and started dialing. Because this wasn't about the law anymore. This was about survival. That night, Boone was moved. Not officially. No paperwork. Just a silent transfer through back corridors and unmarked doors. Like a secret being smuggled across a border. He didn't ask questions. He just got in the car. At the wheel was a man in a gray suit. Same one who had visited him in Holding. Older. Bald. Cold. The kind of man who never introduced himself, because his name didn't matter. Only his purpose did. He passed Boone a burner phone and a thin folder. Your lifeline, the man said. Or your anchor. Depends on how you use it. Boone didn't even pretend to be confused. I'm not your errand boy, he growled. Not anymore, the man said calmly. But you're still useful. You're just complicated now. Boone flipped open the folder. Photos. Surveillance stills. Names. Dates. One of them was Clara's nephew, walking home from school. Another was her sister's address. One showed Clara on her porch, reading a legal brief. Boone's pulse ticked up. This is surveillance, he said. No, the man replied. This is leverage. Boone's hands tightened around the folder. You want me to threaten a judge? We want you to remind her that power doesn't come from robes or courtrooms. It comes from fear. You know how to deliver that. Boone didn't speak. He didn't have to. Because even if he hated every word of it, he knew they were right. Across town, Clara sat at her desk, flipping through sealed files. Complaints with names she recognized. Some she'd ruled on. Others had slipped through unnoticed, buried in paperwork, signed off by people she once trusted. One of them had Judge Benjamin Halcroft's initials, a man who had mentored her, who'd once called her future of Charleston law. She stared at the signature, like it had been forged with betrayal. Carter entered with an update. Track came back on the burner, he said. Used twice. Both to a number linked to a shell company based out of Atlanta. And that company shares an office suite with a lobbying firm tied to the mayor's re-election campaign. Clara exhaled, slow and sharp. So the rock goes beyond the courts. Way beyond, Carter said. She turned to Agent Keene, who had just walked in holding a red file. We found something else. Keene said. From a different investigation. Surveillance audio, flagged and buried. She played the clip. Boone's voice. Clear. Laughing in a locker room. You ever see her up close? That Judge Clara? Walks around like she owns the damn courthouse. Thinks the robe makes her bulletproof. Then another voice. Still unidentified. She ever come after you? Boone again, laughing harder. Let her try. I've got friends higher than her. She steps too far and poof. Activist judge disappears. The recording ended. No one moved. No one spoke. Clara just sat there, face unreadable, spine like a monument. Who else heard this? She asked. We're still running the voice print, Keene said. But our best guess. She flipped the last page of the report. ADA Carson Ramsey. Of course. And then it got worse. There was an emergency meeting at the DA's office last night. Keene added. They're trying to pull your cases. Claiming conflict of interest. They're trying to remove me, Clara said quietly. They say you can't preside over a case where you were the victim. Carter muttered a curse. They want to cut Boone loose. Keene continued. Charge him with a minor misconduct. Retire him early. Spin you as emotionally compromised. Paint you as unstable. Clara stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered as reporters lingered in the dark. She turned back. Then we don't go quiet, she said. Keene tilted her head. You want to push back? Clara's voice dropped. No, I want to go nuclear. The next morning, the press flooded the courthouse steps again. But this time, Clara didn't wait behind the doors. She walked straight into the sunlight. No robe. No bench. Just Clara May, the woman behind the title. Standing not as a judge, but as a citizen. As a witness. As a weapon of truth sharpened by decades of silence. She requested a public hearing. She requested a federal investigation. And when asked why she was doing this, she gave the only answer that mattered. Because the moment they threatened my family, they stopped playing politics and started a war. The line had been crossed. Not with the slap. Not with the threats. Not even with the surveillance. It was the photo, delivered in a plain envelope. No return address. No note. Just a single image. Her nephew, taken 2 days ago. Backpack slung over one shoulder. Walking home from school. Alone. On the back, a message scrawled in thick, jagged block letters. Stay in your lane. Clara didn't panic. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She walked to her door, locked it, and stared at the photo for a full minute. Not because it scared her. Because it confirmed something she'd always known deep down. This wasn't just about Boone. This was about the system behind him. The people who built it. The ones who funded it. Protected it. Used it. And now, she was coming for all of them. Give me the U.S. Marshal Service, she said, phone already in hand. 30 minutes later, Clara was sitting in a steel-walled room in the federal building downtown. Fluorescent lights. No windows. No politics. Just law. 3 U.S. Marshals. 2 DOJ officials. A stack of files. She slid the photo across the table. My nephew, she said. Taken without consent. Sent to me as a warning. The man behind it? Boone, or someone using him. A marshal named Mercer examined the photo, face unreadable. You're sure? I'm sure someone gave him the green light. Boone doesn't move like this without cover. What are you asking for, Judge? Clara folded her hands. Full protection detail for my family. Federal custody for Boone by the end of the day. And I want every case tied to his testimony frozen until it can be reviewed independently. DOJ Rep Francis Kwan leaned forward. That'll shake Charleston's court system for months. Then let it shake. No one argued, because Clara wasn't asking. She was declaring. Back at the courthouse, Agent Keene was waiting with a folder in hand and fire in her eyes. We traced Boone's burner phone, she said. 2 calls. One to a shell company in Atlanta. Clara raised an eyebrow. And that company shares office space with a lobbying firm contracted to your mayor's campaign. The room dropped into a hush. Clara's voice was low. So the network goes past the precinct. Way past, Keene confirmed. She passed Clara a slip of paper. Same shell company was flagged 2 other times. First, in a corruption probe 3 years ago. Buried. No action. Second, Keene's jaw tightened. 6 weeks ago. Financial audit request made by a journalist named Julia Spence. Clara looked up sharply. I remember that name. She disappeared 2 days after filing. Body was found in her car. Ruled overdose. Clara's hand curled slowly into a fist. Did she have a history? No. Keene's voice dropped to a whisper. She had a history of exposing corruption. Clara stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city glowed with morning light. Rooftops, office buildings, alleys that kept secrets, windows that watched without blinking. And somewhere, on one of those rooftops, behind one of those glass walls, someone was watching her now. She turned back. Find me everything she was working on. Every source. Every file. Every name. Keene didn't flinch. We already started. Good, Clara said, because I don't want the thread she pulled. I want the whole damn wall torn down. Across the city, Boone sat alone in a borrowed sedan in a downtown parking garage. The air was stale. The silence deeper than he could handle. His burner phone buzzed. Another text. Another veiled threat disguised as direction. Stay quiet. Don't run. Wait for instruction. But Boone wasn't built to wait. Not anymore. He opened the trunk, pulled out a duffel bag, cash, second burner, and a Glock he wasn't supposed to have. He was done following orders. If Clara wanted a war, she was going to get one. He moved toward the stairwell, steps quick, uneven, but before his hand could touch the door. Sergeant Boone. The voice echoed like judgment through concrete. He turned fast, gun halfway raised. Too late, for U.S. Marshals stepped from the shadows. Guns already drawn. Put it down. Boone's mouth opened, but there was nothing to say. No one coming to rescue him. No backroom deal. No escape. Just the slow, hard realization that the machine that once protected him had decided he was expendable. He dropped the bag, then the gun, then his knees, and the sound that followed, metal sliding across concrete, wasn't just surrender. It was the collapse of a career built on silence. At 3:14 p.m., Clara received the alert. Boone in federal custody. Unarmed. Arrested without incident. She didn't smile. There was no victory in it. Only confirmation. Inside her office, Carter and Keene were already waiting. So was Francis Kwan, back from the DOJ. This time with a briefcase full of newly unsealed documents. We reopened the Julia Spence file, Kwan said. Autopsy was inconclusive. But the coroner's report. She paused. It was altered. Post-submission. Accessed with a private login that no longer exists in the system. Claire's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Someone's been erasing the truth like it's written in pencil. Not anymore, Kwan replied. We've initiated a joint task force. Internal Affairs. Federal Investigators. Judicial Review Board. Keene added, Boone's not talking yet. He will, Clara said, eyes steady. She looked down at the files spread across her desk. Names, dates, crossed out evidence. Whispers turned to patterns. Patterns turned to proof. And at the center, not just Boone, but a network. A system that spanned prosecutors, captains, lobbyists, and maybe, just maybe, the mayor's own office. And now, the foundation had been cracked, the wiring exposed, and Judge Clara May, once a voice in the courtroom, had become a force moving through the city like a storm. It started at midnight, not with a knock at the door, not with a bombshell court filing or a whisper on a wire, but with a headline. Judge May's under scrutiny for 2009 conduct. No source, no evidence, just a cloud of insinuation wrapped in anonymous tips and concerned former colleagues. Within hours, more followed. Clipped images from college protests. Out-of-context quotes. A photo of Clara, 25 years old, fist raised at a civil rights rally, twisted into something ugly. The hashtags came next. Hashtag activist judge. Hashtag Mays must resign. Hashtag bias on the bench. Bot accounts churned the outrage. Cable panels recycled it. And newsrooms that hadn't cared about Boone's files suddenly had time for character assassination. It wasn't a legal attack. It was a story war. And they weren't just coming for her. They were coming for everything she stood on. By sunrise, Clara's phone had 37 missed calls. 3 from the mayor's office. 2 from the ethics board. 1 from her sister. "My school got a call," her sister said. "Some concerned citizen asking if your nephew was being indoctrinated." Clara closed her eyes for a moment. Not out of exhaustion. Out of calculation. Because now, they weren't just targeting her name. They were targeting her bloodline. Carter walked in carrying a manila folder and a firestorm behind his eyes. "They're throwing mud," he said, trying to drown the signal and noise. Clara nodded, then pulled open her bottom drawer. Inside, a small black binder. She handed it to him. "What's this?" "Everything they never wanted me to say out loud." Carter flipped it open. Case notes. Names. Dates. Incidents that had never made it into the record, but always sat in the room like ghosts. "You documented all of this?" he asked, eyes wide. "I'm a judge," Clara said. "Documentation is how we survive." He closed the binder. "This isn't a defense." "No," Clara said, voice low. "It's a nuclear option." That night, she held a private meeting in her chambers. Agent Keene, Carter, Francis Kwan, 2 federal prosecutors from D.C. The room was quiet, heavy with the weight of what came next. "The smear campaign is coordinated," Kwan said. "We traced 2 of the first posts back to accounts linked to a political PR firm, the same one handling optics for Charleston's mayoral re-election." Keene nodded. "And one of the ethics board's senior investigators used to be Ramsey's law partner." "Of course he was," Clara muttered. She looked down at the names, at the pattern they formed. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a defense mechanism. The machine had identified her as a threat, and now it was trying to neutralize her. But what it didn't understand was this. Clara wasn't trying to survive anymore. She was hunting. By week's end, 3 more officers had turned state's evidence. 1 precinct captain stepped down. Ramsey, he hadn't been seen in public in 4 days. But the real quake came in a voicemail Clara received just before dawn. A voice she hadn't heard in years. Smooth, precise, familiar like a scar. Judge Benjamin Halcroft. He had mentored her, sworn her in, once called her the soul of the bench. Now, he was on the list. "Clara," his voice said, "by now you've seen my name. I imagine you feel betrayed. But some structures survive because they must. If you take us all down, you don't just topple corruption. You collapse what's holding this city together." A pause. "You don't want chaos, Clara. You don't want blood. Walk away while you still can. Or you won't just lose your seat. You'll lose everything." Click. The message ended. The thread didn't. Carter saw the black SUV, before Clara did, parked across the courthouse's rear loading dock. Windows tinted. Engine running. "You want to call it in?" he asked. "No," Clara said. "Let them watch." She turned back toward her office window. "Because the moment they try to silence me, I'll make damn sure the whole city hears me scream." And scream she did. Not with rage. With evidence. With names. With files. She didn't leak the black binder. She delivered it. To the DOJ. To the press. To the Judicial Oversight Commission. Inside a decade of rot. Prosecutorial collusion. Evidence suppression. Backroom deals. Names that mattered. Names that signed laws and chaired committees. Names that built Charleston's legal walls and now had to answer for the cracks they ignored. The headlines changed again. Whistleblower judge drops case files on network of collusion. Mays demands inquiry into police prosecutor corruption. Federal monitor launched in Charleston court system. The bots couldn't keep up. The smear couldn't hold. Because for the first time in years, truth wasn't quiet. It was loud. And Clara? She wasn't hiding anymore. "You did it," Carter said one evening, watching the sun drop behind the city skyline. Clara didn't look away from the window. "No," she replied softly. "I just turned on the light." The roaches scattered themselves. 3 weeks later, the federal courthouse downtown didn't feel like a place where cases were heard. It felt like history was about to be made, or buried. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Cameras were stacked 3 deep at the back. Outside, protesters held signs. Reporters held breath. Survivors held memories. Claire didn't sit on the bench this time. She wasn't behind the gavel. She wasn't in control. She was a witness now. And she was ready. The state of South Carolina versus Travis Boone. Charges: assault on a federal judge, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to suppress evidence, witness intimidation, perjury. But the trial wasn't just about Boone. It was about everything Boone had been allowed to become, everything the system had protected, everything Clara had exposed. And now, the machine that had once cheered Boone on had turned away from him, because he was no longer useful. He was radioactive. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the state calls Judge Clara May." The room hushed like a church waiting for a confession. Clara rose. She walked with no notes, no escort, no robe, just truth. And when she took the stand, the silence grew heavier. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore her oath, then looked across the courtroom, not at Boone, but at the jury, and spoke. "On the morning of April 11th, she said, I was struck in the face by a man who believed I didn't belong." No tears, no tremble, only clarity. He didn't know who I was, but he thought he knew what I wasn't. She didn't just tell the jury what happened. She told them what it meant. I've spent my career defending the law, but in that moment, I realized something terrifying. The law, on its own, doesn't protect anyone. It only works when the people behind it believe in fairness. She paused, and then added the sentence that reached everyone in the room. Respect, law, truth. Those things have become negotiable in our system, and what isn't protected gets preyed upon. The prosecutor nodded solemnly. No further questions. Then Boone's lawyer stood, young, nervous, and over his head, he shuffled his papers, tried to find footing. "Judge May, do you think you're above the law?" Clara turned to him slowly, like a professor considering whether a student had been paying attention. "No, I think I'm beneath it, like everyone else. That's the point." Laughter rippled in the gallery, not mocking, relieved, because finally someone had said it. The defense tried again. "You've brought personal bias into this investigation, haven't you?" Claire didn't blink. "I've brought truth. And if that truth is uncomfortable, that's not bias. That's justice doing its job." She stepped down from the stand without fanfare. But when she walked back to her seat, the silence she left behind wasn't empty. It was filled with certainty that something had shifted, permanently. 2 days later, the verdict came in. Guilty, on all counts. But by then, Boone was no longer the headline. He was the fuse. The fire had already spread. A statewide investigation launched into judicial misconduct. Over 140 convictions tied to Boone and his network were placed under federal review. 3 prosecutors resigned. 2 precinct captains were fired. A civil rights oversight board was formed. And the Charleston Police Department? Now under full federal supervision. But Clara wasn't done. Not yet. Not until the walls that hid this kind of power were rebuilt with glass instead of brick. And if they wouldn't rebuild it with her, then she'd burn it down without them. It was raining the day she returned to the courtroom. Not a storm, just a soft, steady fall that draped the city in gray. The courthouse loomed the way it always had, stone-faced, proud, unmoved. But inside, something had shifted. Not in the architecture, in the atmosphere. The halls were quieter now, but not from fear, from respect. Clara walked those marble corridors one last time, not as a judge, not as a symbol, just Clara, the woman who had broken the silence.